The Xbots are coming, and so is the next version of Windows. We are back, friends. After a week off, I was down on a little vacation, and now we are back, and the news is happening. Hopefully, you had a wonderful week. We're now into the first week of April. It feels like every week just kind of flies by these days. I don't know if that's getting old or just whatever it is, but there's a lot going on. There is a lot going on in the industry, including the fact that it looks like Microsoft may have minted a build that will be for Windows 11 24H2. Now, this is build 26100, and so that's a nice round number. Typically, when we see these nice round numbers, that means the build is the RTM build, or what we used to refer to as release to manufacturing. However, it's kind of evolved over the year. It's more of like this is the base build rather than like this is the build that everybody's going to use, because by the time this build gets onto a device on the manufacturing line, and by the time you run it at your home after you buy a new device, it's going to be updated. There'll be patches and everything else, but it looks like this might be the build. And so, yeah, looks like Microsoft may have minted that. So other things that are happening here, the Microsoft Store, as you can see on this video, if you're watching here on the YouTube side of the podcast, they are making dramatic performance improvements here. And this is a really nice opening animation, and it's got a lot of polish, and it looks nice. Like, hey, that's a store experience that people probably want to use. And so hopefully we'll see this level of polish eventually make their way into maybe the other portfolio of apps that Microsoft has. It's clear that they can now build this sort of stuff. And so maybe we can cross our fingers that the new Outlook will eventually not be terrible and maybe have this. No, wait, that's not going to happen. But maybe Paint or something, I don't know. The other Microsoft apps, that would be just fantastic. So, other big news that is happening in the world of Windows this week. So this headline came out that, hey, Microsoft announced the pricing for all of the extended security updates, or ESUs. And it was just really being thrown around at the end of the day that it was going to cost you $61 a year for the first year if you are a consumer. However, there has been an update to the post. So the pricing information that if you're aware of and you've heard about it already this week, that is for enterprise only. They had to do a little update here, which you can see on the screen. It says, look, this is not consumer pricing. This is just our enterprise customers. And it's not cheap. It's $61 for the first year. It's $122 for the second year, $244 for the third year if you want to keep using Windows 10 in an enterprise environment and keeping it updated. And that's per device. So remember, Windows 10 reaches end of life October of 2025. And based on this, like, it looks like Microsoft is not going to be extending the life cycle of Windows 10. So you've got to update, buy yourself a new piece of hardware, or do something else to get yourself over that hump. And there you go. Now, I find this fascinating, and as Bob Ross would say, a happy little accident. A Microsoft engineer has thwarted a massive backdoor attack on the open source community because he found some bad actors who were submitting code to an open source project that is widely used within the Linux environment that would have created a backdoor. Now, there's much better and much more detailed posts about the security side of this, but this really just opens the door of like, hey, open source software. I'm not against open source software, right? There's the theory of many eyes. Like if he was not looking at this open source software, then this could have been whatever in a private vulnerability or something like that. So it did work. However, my question becomes, like, this was found accidentally. How many other projects like this have been compromised that we're just not aware of? Now, based on some preliminary information, it looked like the group that submitted this, or the individuals, however you want to phrase this, had been successfully submitting submissions to the project for like 2-3 years, something like that, and like actual updates that were meaningful. And then there were obviously bad actors being paid by an entity that we don't know. I guess they could have been acting on their own, but to be able to do this for several years at a time makes it kind of feel like it's probably a state-sponsored thing. I'm sure more information will come out in the near future. Go read your favorite security blog. But either way, like, they were playing the long game and they got caught. How many other people are playing the long game and haven't been caught? So yeah, it's more alarming than anything else. Now, Microsoft Copilot for Security is now generally available, and it is not cheap. It looks like the cost is going to cost you like almost $3,000 per month. That's just kind of like the bare minimum usage is about $3,000 a month, something like that. It's not cheap. However, this guy, Rue Campbell, who I've known for many years, is now using the tool, and this is hilarious. So the fact or the daily tip when he opened this product up. The first prompt with the daily tip that says, to catch Copilot's fabrications, try probing the references it cites. Even those might be made up. Quote, same. Dates? Yep. So you're paying $3,000 a month, and the first daily tip is you can't trust any of this information. So yeah, that's not exactly inspiring a lot of confidence. Now, I get it. You should always fact check anything an AI bot is vomiting up and saying you should do, especially when it comes to security. And Microsoft absolutely has to find a way to cover its tail, because it's like, hey, this is an AI tool making security recommendations. And what happens if it says, like, I don't know, open up all your ports to the outside world and nobody will ever hack you or something like that? Or just take down the firewall. They're useless. And then, like, you could be like, hey, the bot told me this, or your AI tool told me to do all this. And yeah. So basically it's saying, like, look, fact check all this stuff, but that just, what's the point then? If you can't trust it, you're basically just doing a Google search, but maybe it's a little bit more limited. I'm sure somebody will find value and Microsoft will figure it out, but whatever. According to StatCounter, Microsoft Edge has 12.71% of the desktop browser market share, which is actually a decent amount considering where they used to be many, many years ago. However, there is a new feature coming to Edge that I believe they're trialing on the earliest rings. You're going to be able to limit the amount of RAM that the application actually uses. One of the biggest complaints of Chrome and Edge is, right, it spins up a bunch of processes and it uses all your RAM. Now, I am not somebody who gets concerned about RAM. If I paid for a device that has, let's just say, 32 gigs of RAM, I want 31 gigs used all the time, right? I don't like leaving RAM free and having the browser suck it all up doesn't bother me. I mean, as long as it's not because the application is inefficient or gone rogue or has a spinning process. But I mean, if it's one for each tab and makes it feel performant, that is fine by me. You bought RAM, use RAM. However, you will soon be able to limit the amount of RAM it looks like Edge will use, assuming that feature graduates all the way up into the shipping version. So that's going to make some people happy. And something that else might make a few people happy, but it's probably a little too late, is Microsoft will unbundle Teams from its Office suite. If you have a current subscription or whatever else, like, nothing's changing. It's really just for new people who are signing up, which I don't know how many of that's happening. I'm sure it's happening in some volume, but it gives you some more flexibility. But at the end of the day, I don't know. It took a lot of moving heaven and earth, but Microsoft's already cemented. It's already planted its productivity flag with Teams, and I don't think this is going to change much of anything. Now, a little play on the how people always respond to every Xbox comment. The Xbots are coming. The Xbots, literally the Xbox AI chatbots, according to The Verge. Now, it looks like the initial Xbots, if you will, which is what they should call them. Microsoft should just totally lean into this. Is more of a support agent. It can do some basic refunds. It can help with some basic things. I don't think this is like a Bonsai Buddy or a Clippy living on your Xbox. This appears to be more of a desktop focusing, although you could very easily see this translating over to the piece or the Xbox itself, just living in the dashboard. I'm not quite sure yet. We'll see what Microsoft does with it. This should surprise 0.0% of people who pay any attention to anything, because Microsoft loves their AI stuff. And Xbox is kind of a bit of an outlier, because it's like, how do you bring this AI stuff into a gaming experience? And well, at least you can on the support side. And so there you go. And speaking of games, Hellblade 2 got its, I would say, light media coverage review. They invited publications to the studio, and it seems like everything is generally very positive so far. They did some playthroughs. I will tell you, it looks like visually, even if this isn't your game, like this still that I tossed up on the screen here, this looks like a movie, like legitimately looks like a movie. And so this is really going to be pushing Unreal Engine 5 probably to the brink of what the Xbox can do. And if you're pushing things to the brink of what the Xbox can do, that clearly means 30 frames per second. Now, this has been met with some sadness, obviously, because we all want that silky smooth 60 FPS. And I will tell you that I am one of those people that want 60 FPS. However, it's just the reality of the situation. So if the options are like really slim down and go and slim down the visual experience, and then you'll get 60 frames per second, or, really push the visual fidelity boundaries, I'm okay with it. I'm not going to lose sleep over this. This is a game that's coming to Game Pass. I will play it because it's on Game Pass. This isn't typically the type of game I play. However, it looks fantastic, like visual fidelity. And so this is going to be some eye candy, I think, across the board. And we'll have to wait and see how it actually performs in reviews and everything else. And so, yeah. And there's also the possibility that it could eventually get to 60 frames per second. Keep in mind that the developers, if they're truly what we believe pushing the visual boundaries here of what can be achieved, they're going to find optimizations eventually. It just depends on how much effort and how much time they have devoted to that. Whereas I suspect right now, most of their time is more likely spent fixing, polishing bugs, stability, and everything else, rather than trying to get from 30 to 60 frames per second, because that is a challenge. Like, people think it's just like, oh, just include the 60 frames per second JavaScript library or something like that, and then it just magically happens. No, like, it's an optimization thing that you typically don't want to do until you're really comfortable with where you're at. And I'm not saying they haven't done that. 30 frames per second on an older piece of hardware running the latest software is an accomplishment within itself. So, yeah, super looking forward to that one. Also, I'm guessing that Xbox controllers just sell exceptionally well, because Microsoft kicks these things out the door as if there is zero effort to actually make them or expense tied to making them, honestly, because there is this new controller. What is this thing called? It is called the Nocturnal Vapor Special Edition. And it just looks different. I mean, I don't know. If you're a collector of these things, absolutely could understand that. I get it. People buy shoes, people buy controllers, people buy all sorts of things. And maybe controllers are what people love at the end of the day. I don't know. I still rock the Elite Series 2, although I like to hold up for the Elite Series 3. We'll see when that eventually ships. But here we are. All right, that wraps up the news, my friends. Let's move on to my favorite part of the week, the questions of the week. Sydney2K dropping the first question. Happy spring, Brett. Happy spring to you, Sydney. Assuming that you are in the northern hemisphere. If you're in the southern hemisphere, as it is Sydney, which could be Sydney, Australia, that would be happy fall to you, I believe. So he says, I know you have mentioned not using your browser to save passwords. That is correct. I use a password manager. Now, I have Authenticator on my phone for work. It has started asking me to save my passwords. Is it safe to do so, or should I let a third-party manager keep doing so? I guess it depends on what your comfort level is. The Authenticator app, I don't believe, would be a bad place to do this. The reason why, if anybody's wondering, why I don't save them in a browser is, one, that really solidifies that browser lock-in. Like, if all your browser passwords are saved in Edge, going to Chrome becomes difficult, or Firefox becomes difficult. And so by having them in one password, you have one secure location to store all of your stuff. There's many out there. I know a lot of people like Bitwarden. If you don't want to pay for a service, I believe Bitwarden allows you to have complete control. And so, choose your own path, whatever is the best. I am a firm believer that password managers are a good thing. And so I'm not super familiar with how all the features and functionality of the Authenticator app. I do use the Microsoft Authenticator app along with Google at the end of the day. However, the 1Password experience, where it's just built quasi into the keyboard, if you will, has been really good for me and something I quite like. I don't know if the Authenticator would actually do that. So just something to keep in mind. Mr. PKI dropping the question. He says, China bans Intel and AMD processor in government computers. Do you think this will be the end of Windows being offered to other customers in China? So Mr. PKI got it correct here, because there were some headlines that were incorrect where it says China bans Intel and AMD processors. It's only government PCs at the end of the day that ban this stuff. So the consumers and the businesses can still run Intel and AMD stuff at the end of the day. I think there's going to be, I don't think there's going to be like a mass exodus from Windows from China because of this. First off, I think it's probably fair to say, from an operating system perspective on PCs, Windows runs the world. And so all these Chinese business partners who work with US companies are going to want interoperability. And so let's be honest, that's Windows, and it's not going anywhere. So at least for the time being. So the Joe Finn rocking another question. He says, I completely left this out. Oh, I completely forgot about this. The Joe Finn says, does the new org putting Windows and Surface together again make you think the brand and product lines will be reinvigorated, or is the current lineup of Surface devices basically what we're going to get? So, jump back. I think this happened last week when I was on vacation, which is why I didn't see it when I was making the show notes for today. So Pavan, an individual who has been at Microsoft for a long time, just like this thing that's in my eye. Oh my gosh, what is in my eye? Anyways, I was going to edit that out, but we're just going to leave it. Anyways, Pavan, who has been at Windows and servers for a long time. I've met him a few times. Last time I talked to him was, I think, the Windows 10 launch event where we met in person because Windows 11 happened, and we all know what's happened in the past few years. He and I talked about taskbars for like 20 plus minutes until the press or the media people were like, okay, can you guys just like not? Can we get back to Windows 10? And so anyways, he is a great individual for running, super dedicated and super talented. I always left talking with him feeling like, man, that guy knows his stuff, sort of thing. So I think from a leadership and knowledge perspective of the brand and what is going on with Windows, a great potential leader. We'll wait and see what happens over time. So anyway, so Pavan is doing that. Microsoft has once again assigned a single individual to be running Windows and servers, which, if as a Windows fan, is a good thing. Now, it'll take some time, and this has been kind of like the fault of all this. So Windows has been kind of like in this turmoil thing, right? Panos left several months ago, and there was another leader who's now looks like he's being pushed out of the company, who was tweeting out like things they were going to add to Windows, and well, now he's not leading Windows anymore, so that's not happening. And we'll have to wait and see. The things that I hope to happen to see is just one update per year. Let's just get to that one update per year, but we'll see. So to answer the Joe Finn's question, now that we have a single unified leader again, are we going to see more aggressive expansion within service? I candidly don't think we will. I don't think that we will. I think Microsoft has established, like, look, we have a core line of products that sell in a volume that is acceptable to the org to help us stay in the PC space. That would be the Surface Laptop and the Surface Pro, and then the higher end Surface Laptop Studio potentially might be what we're going to get. Are we going to get more mobile devices? I would be quite surprised. Are we going to get any other crazy offshoots like the earbuds and the headphones? I don't think we're going to. You got to remember, Microsoft also removed all of its other hardware, like its keyboard, mice, and all that stuff. That's now, they sold it out or spun it out into that other company is now licensing it. So I am not expecting an aggressive approach from Surface here going forward. And then Joe says, also, with all the ARM talk, people are excited about a powerful ARM Surface Pro. But what about a decent ARM Surface Go to compete with the iPad Air? Any hope of seeing one in the near future? Well, the last Surface Go revision, if I remember correctly, was actually only targeted at education customers and potentially some other business customers, if you will. My honest gut answer is probably not. I think we're gonna see the Elite chip in a more traditional looking Surface product, and also I believe also in the Pro potentially. And so I'm looking forward to like the conversation I think Qualcomm wants, and I think honestly Microsoft wants. It's like when you go into Best Buy, there's a Qualcomm device, there's an AMD device, there's an Intel device. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, right? Now, how they're going to differentiate these things, that'll be interesting to see. Qualcomm has typically, kind of hung its hat on like better battery life and everything else. And so Intel has really climbed up in terms of battery life. I'll be curious just to see how they're going to try to differentiate these things. The real loser, candidly, if we were talking about this, is probably Intel at the end of the day. AMD has always kind of been a smaller player in the space. They stopped making the Surface laptop with an AMD chip, I think, if that sounds correct. So we'll see. I'm not expecting any aggressive Surface movements here going forward like we had seen in the past, which is unfortunate at the end of the day. So there you go, guys. That wraps up that week in a nutshell. It's kind of a shorter week. Next week, there's a solar eclipse. Hopefully that goes well for everybody. Fingers crossed, if you're going to go into totality, you get good weather. That is the biggest thing right now. I'm not far from totality. I'm planning to take time to drive over and hopefully experience this. But right now, the weather's not looking so good. So we need some fingers crossed for good weather to see this on Monday. If you get the chance, definitely it's worth the trip if you can make it happen. If you can't, you can always keep it subscribed here because the only BS on this podcast is me.